This is the story of a single mom who would do anything for her kids.
Hello, Tracy.
Hi.
Sandy loved her children. They were a joy to watch as a family.
When a brutal murder
The officer just spun around and said, "Out."
leads to a nationwide manhunt,
Law enforcement put out a lookout which went to every agency in the United States.
the truth of how it ends.
How could this possibly have happened? It's just incomprehensible.
Will destroy this family. It's Memorial Day weekend, 1989, in Palco, Kansas. And Sandy Miles is celebrating her 40th birthday.
Okay, blow the candles out.
Help me, guys.
Behind the camera is Sandy's sister Edie.
This is Sandy's birthday. Sandy came to our house for her 40th birthday, and I'd made her a birthday cake. I enjoyed doing something for her, making her day special. We had the family there for a meal.
Next to Sandy are her two children, 13-year-old Chad and 8-year-old Tracy.
Edie's thing was cakes of all occasions. She definitely wanted to make Sandy feel loved on her birthday.
Tracy moves in for a big hug. See how happy Sandy is? Can I blow him again? Oh, boy. Okay, that's enough.
We were extremely close as a family.
Sisters Sandy, Edie, and Pat are country girls at heart.
The rural area where we live is pretty sparsely populated. You could go a whole mile and not see a house.
Growing up, they quickly learned to make the most of their rural lifestyle.
Pat was always older and more out with her friends and so forth. Sandy and I were the ones who played together. We would go up to the playground and play on the jungle gym and the swings. We played school inside. I always was the teacher, and I was the older child, so therefore I could make Sandy be the student.
As the years pass, Pat and Edie start families of their own. But Sandy decides it's time to fly the nest and moves 150 miles away to the larger town of Hutchinson, where she gets a job at a local aviation factory.
She was a very dedicated employee, rarely did not show up for work, rarely called in sick.
Despite the distance, the sisters make sure the bonds between them remain as tight as ever.
I would come to Hutchinson and we would go out to eat and take the kids to the park.
Sandy makes regular trips to Edie's ranch in Palco to visit her nieces and nephews.
Papa's drunk in the beer.
And while she's thrilled to be an aunt, Sandy can't quite disguise the fact that she's desperate to start a family of her own.
Sandy really wanted children.
Who wanted to hand the horse?
It may have been hard for her seeing that Edie and I both had children.
You guys are all hiding from me.
Back in Hutchinson, Sandy decides to make a change.
She started going to some singles clubs and trying to meet someone she wanted to spend her life with.
In 1976, Sandy has some exciting news for her sisters. She's met someone, and she's going to be a mom.
She was very excited about being a mother and having a child in her life.
In March of 1976, Chad is born. But Sandy's relationship with his father doesn't last. Chad is still young when Sandy takes a leap of faith again and starts a relationship with a work colleague, Jerry Miles. And it's not long until there's the sound of wedding bells.
I was really happy for Sandy on her wedding day. She had on this pretty blue dress, carried her bouquet, and it was a happy day.
I was maid of honor, and I remember telling Jerry in a fun way that he'd better take good care of Sandy.
In September of 1980, Sandy and Jerry welcome a new baby, Tracy.
Sandy always did want a little girl to play with Chad. And they were both beautiful children. She made good-looking babies.
But Sandy and Jerry are struggling. And in 1985, they divorce, leaving Sandy a single mom again, but now with 2 kids.
I think she did a real good job of coping with being on her own.
With 2 failed relationships behind her, Sandy decides to focus completely on her kids.
They were a joy to watch as a family. She would hug and kiss them, and they would sit on her lap, and she would play with them. She had someone in her life that she really cared about, and they cared about her.
And Edie's Ranch always provides a loving environment for them.
Children could go outside and play and ride bikes and ride horses and just many different activities. So we enjoyed it, they enjoyed it, and it's just a nice place to get together.
It's a place of adventure and escape.
Grandma and Grandpa's house was always the gathering place for the whole family. Big open spread with tons of stuff to do. To able to burn off energy and explore and play.
For Tracy and Chad, it's an idyllic world far from their lives in the city.
Tracy and Chad would go horseback riding on a horse named Cajun. Our horses were gentle enough that they could ride a little bit on their own. They enjoyed that.
Every Easter time, the family gather for Grandma Edie's beloved Easter egg hunt. For the kids, it's the highlight of the year.
Anytime Chad and Tracy were coming, we were always really excited. The Easter egg hunts were legendary. They would put all sorts of things in these plastic eggs. There'd be candy in there, there'd be cash in there, there'd be all sorts of things you could find, and it was always a mad scramble among the cousins who could find the best egg. Really great memory for all of us kids.
When the kids aren't hunting Easter broken,
This is Sandy's birthday.
Sandy Miles' 40th birthday also marks 4 years since she became a single mom, working to support her 2 kids, Chad and Tracy.
Oh, boy. Okay, everyone's saying happy birthday.
It's a role that carries guilt.
I think that Sandy felt bad about her children not having a father in the house. Maybe she overcompensated a little bit by buying them too much.
Oh, that's it.
Tracy's best friend through school, Erica Buford, sees just how close the family is.
They all loved each other. Everything Sandy did was for them.
Supporting them all means working long hours at her factory job.
Sandy worked on an assembly line. She had to work. She was a single mother and had to provide for the family.
Tracy responds to her mom's absence with a need for loving attention.
Tracy was very affectionate with her mother.
You know, as any child, they would want their mother to spend more time with them.
As Tracy grows up, the ties that bond mother and daughter become even stronger. And they're only strengthened when 20-year-old Chad decides it's time for him to fly the nest and embark on a life of his own.
After high school, Chad moved to New Mexico, married a young lady from there. Sandy and Tracy's relationship became closer at that time.
For Sandy, life is now all about Tracy. Tracy is a keen athlete and dancer, and Sandy makes sure her daughter never misses a practice. Daughter gets every chance in life.
Sandy always wanted the best for Tracy. She sent her to schools in different districts to make sure she was getting the best education.
In her mind, I think she felt like, well, I didn't go to college, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. I want better for my kids. And that was so important to her.
But Tracy is discovering there's more to high school than gym class.
Tracy was 16 when she started dating more. We'd all be at each other's house, like just sitting around talking, and we listened to music more than anything.
There's one boy in particular that catches Tracy's attention, Paul Nelson.
He was the new kid in town. Paul was the character. I just remember he just brought the fun. His energy attracted her to him.
And Paul is swept away by Tracy.
Oh, he thought she was gorgeous. Paul was like googly-eyed.
But as more of Paul's friends start to hang out at Tracy's house, Erica begins to feel increasingly uncomfortable.
The dynamic started to change. My gut was telling me, you don't want to be around these people.
And in early 1997, 16-year-old Tracy confirms Erica's fears when she reveals some stunning news. She's pregnant, and Paul is the father.
Sandy did not feel that Tracy was old enough or ready for a baby. I remember being surprised by Tracy and Sandy arguing. I'd never seen them argue.
Sandy's own failed relationships and struggles as a single mom means she wants something different for Tracy.
I'm sure that Sandy felt that Tracy needed to finish her education. She needed to be prepared for life more before she had a child. I'm sure that's why she encouraged her to have an abortion.
Tracy eventually agrees to terminate the pregnancy.
That was a tough day. It was a very tough day.
The relationship between mom and daughter is at breaking point, but Sandy has a peace offering. A black Ford Mustang.
I don't think she could believe it at first, but she was just crazy, happy, excited. As any kid would be. I certainly didn't have a car at that age.
It's a truly grand gesture, but secretly, it's one that Sandy struggles to afford.
I'm assuming she had to have went into debt for it because single mother, I mean, she wasn't wealthy.
Despite the cost, the gift seems to pay off.
Tracy was very proud of that Mustang. Tracy and I spent a lot of time just riding around in that car. Sandy was very proud of herself for giving it to her.
But there's more to Sandy's generosity than an act of kindness.
I think the car may have been something to try to keep Tracy on the right path and the straight and narrow. But it made her happy to see her happy too.
Sandy's determined to show the world she's rebuilt the bond between her and Tracy.
She had raised a good, sweet girl, and she wanted everybody to think that it was still that way. But things were changing, and it wasn't.
March 30th, 1998. Pat Douglas Butler receives a worrying call.
I got a phone call from Sandy's work. They said she hadn't been to work in several days, and she had not called in like you're supposed to do.
That was very unlike her. And so Pat became very concerned and called Sandy.
But there's no answer. Pat decides to go check Sandy's house.
We got in the car and went to her house. Her car was under the carport. The curtains were all pulled and everything.
There's no sign of Sandy anywhere. Pat decides to contact Tracy at school to see if she can shed light on the mystery. But the school resource officer tells them that Tracy's not there and hasn't been for days.
I was bewildered and couldn't figure out what could be going on, but something told me there was something wrong.
They follow the resource officer back to Sandy's house.
The resource officer went in first. The officer just spun around and said, "Out." Well, we knew right away what had happened because of the odor. You can't explain it or describe it, but you know what it is. And I knew what it was. I knew immediately.
The resource officer dials 911.
We go in with our weapons in a ready position. Once we opened the door, there was a very distinct odor of decomposition. We immediately looked to the left, which was Tracy's bedroom. And in that hallway, coming out of the bedroom, was where the body was. The body was laying halfway in the entranceway and halfway in the hallway, and there was a large pool of blood around the head area. There was an indication there was possibly a struggle that started maybe in the bedroom, and it continued on out to the hallway.
It was clear that there had been several blows to the head with a blunt object. Around the throat was a telephone cord. At that point was not tightly tied, but clearly indications were at that point that strangulation had occurred also.
Lying in the hallway is Sandy Miles. It seems she's been dead for several days, and her 17-year-old daughter, Tracy, is missing. Investigators scour the home for potential clues.
In addition to searching for the murder weapon, the officers were also searching for any items that might have been missing from the house. One item missing from the house was a VCR.
This is Sandy's birthday.
I remember being called to the office for a phone call, and I answered the phone, and the man identified himself as the police chaplain and told me that my sister Sandy had been found murdered in her home. You're trying to comprehend what they say, but yet at the same time you're dealing with all these emotions about your sister being murdered. I had absolutely no idea why and what reason.
News of the brutal killing quickly reaches Tracy's best friend, Erica.
My mom opened the door and came in the room and was like, Erica, I need to talk to you now. She put me outside and she's like, they just found Sandy's body at the house. I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, there's police tape, there's police everywhere. You can't get anywhere on the block. Erica, it's true, Sandy's gone and nobody knows where Tracy is either.
17-year-old Tracy's disappearance from school appears to coincide with her mother's murder.
We were just very worried about Tracy's whereabouts and what was happening to her. And at the same time, we were trying to deal with Sandy being murdered.
I was scared, like crying uncontrollably, like to the point of physical illness. Feverishly praying, like just, please, please God, don't let nothing be wrong with my best friend, please.
Detectives need to find Tracy. They could have a double homicide on their hands.
Due to the graphic nature of this crime, due to the brutality of it, and knowing now that we have another person missing, there was a very high sense of urgency.
My fear and nightmare at that point was that something had happened to Tracy. She had been abducted or killed.
Sandy Miles has been murdered, and her 17-year-old daughter Tracy is missing. The news soon spreads throughout the family.
Chad was devastated at the loss of his mother. He assumed, like the rest of us, that Tracy had been abducted.
The brutality of the scene is a shock for the hardened detectives.
It took us all back due to the nature of how violent it was. Why this happened to a woman that was just a single parent trying to raise her kid. What would she have done to deserve that?
The crime scene at Sandy's house reveals a vital clue.
It was determined there had been no forced entry, therefore Sandy probably knew her killer.
Police immediately called Tracy and Sandy's friends to see if anyone had contact with them. One name keeps coming up, an old boyfriend of Tracy's, Jeremy Bell.
When the name Jeremy Bell came up, Hutchinson is a small enough town. All law enforcement immediately knew who he was, immediately knew he had been in jail the week before and that he had been released. Jeremy Bell was considered to be a violent individual. Clearly, that became a primary focus of law enforcement.
The fact that Jeremy Bell is fresh out of jail is a huge red flag to investigators. Police bring him in for questioning.
When Jeremy was interviewed, he indicated to law enforcement that he had went to Cary Park and played basketball with a friend.
Investigators need to find out if Jeremy is lying.
Law enforcement immediately contacted Jeremy's friends to verify that in fact he had been at those locations.
Jeremy has a strong alibi, and police rule him out of the investigation. But before he leaves, he throws the detectives a bone.
He said they should be looking at Tracy's present boyfriend, Paul Nelson. He certainly had no fond feelings towards Paul. He felt Paul was ruining Tracy's life and only had very negative things to say about Paul Nelson.
And files on Paul Nelson seem to support his claims.
We knew almost immediately Paul had had numerous contacts with law enforcement and had previous criminal convictions. We also knew through discussions with friends that drugs certainly were involved in his lifestyle and certainly raised concerns.
Paul's relationship with Tracy and her mom throws up yet another red flag.
About a year before the homicide, Tracy became pregnant with the father being Paul Nelson. Sandy did not want Tracy to be with Paul. Sandy told Tracy that if she kept the baby, she would be forced out of the home. So at that point, Tracy made the decision to have the abortion.
Police now have a possible motive: revenge.
Paul had strong feelings against Sandy, and Sandy had equally strong feelings against Paul.
Investigators need to find Paul Nelson as soon as possible. They contact his friends and family in a bid to track him down.
Paul's parents had indicated he had not been staying at the residence. They hadn't seen him for approximately a week.
Interviews with Paul's friends suggest he isn't returning anytime soon.
He was leaving for Mexico and also indicated that he did have $2,000 in cash. He was driving a black Mustang. One of his friends said he had pawned a VCR to get the money. The VCR was missing from Sandy's residence.
Paul Nelson is now the prime suspect. Officers canvass the pawn shops downtown to see if they can find a VCR that matches the one stolen from Sandy's house. They quickly catch their first break. In the second store they visit, they find Sandy's VCR. And the pawn shop owner has a surveillance camera.
The pawn shop had surveillance video. The police took control of the video to verify who in fact had pawned the VCR.
Detectives spool through the footage from the days before Sandy's murder. And on March 26th, they spot a familiar face.
That was Paul Nelson on the video. The owner said yes. A young male came in, attempted to pawn the VCR. He told him he would not pawn the VCR without the remote control. The young male left and returned a short time later with the remote control, and at that point the pawning took place. Paul was verified as the person who had pawned the VCR that had come from Sandy's house.
The shop owner tells police he only gave Nelson $50 for the VCR, far less than the $2,000 his friend told police he's carrying. But detectives can now directly link him to the murder of Sandy Miles. The fate of her daughter, Tracy, is still unknown.
When the videotape was viewed, it clearly verified Paul was involved, but it still did not indicate where Tracy was and what had become of Tracy. And obviously, finding out Tracy's whereabouts is still of primary importance.
Back at police headquarters, detectives are trying to establish Sandy's final movements leading up to her death. Investigators examine Sandy's financial records. It's not long before they get a breakthrough.
We were able to verify $2,000 had been taken on Sandy's account. Paul had $2,000. That further built the case against Paul.
Police need to verify if Paul was somehow able to access Sandy's account.
That bank did indicated that in fact it was Tracy Miles who came in to cash a $2,000 check.
Police have to consider the possibility that Tracy is still alive.
Paul Nelson, according to his friends that morning, was driving a black Mustang and said he was going to Mexico.
Nelson may not have had time to cross the border. With time running out, the police need reinforcements.
It became necessary to bring in as many law enforcement agencies as possible.
To know if the pair have crossed into Mexico, investigators must check hundreds of cameras and thousands of hours of footage. And it may be too late. March 30th, 1998, the Mexican border crossing, El Paso, Texas.
Law enforcement put out a lookout for Paul Nelson and Tracy, which would have went to every agency in the United States. They issue a special bulletin of most wanted.
Nelson is reportedly heading to Mexico in Tracy's black Mustang. With detectives worried that he has already crossed the border, they check hundreds of hours of poor quality, low-resolution security camera footage at the El Paso checkpoint. This never-before-seen footage highlights the immensity of the task. 160,000 people make this crossing every day. But almost a week after Paul and Tracy's disappearance, investigators catch a glimpse of a familiar-looking car. It's a black Ford Mustang, but it's coming back into the U.S.
So the nationwide alert for Paul and Tracy, but apparently it hadn't reached Border Patrol by the time Paul and Tracy came through. Border Patrol established that, in fact, Paul and Tracy did not have a visa to allow them to remain into Mexico or to travel anywhere further than just a few miles from the border.
With no visas, they could not remain in Mexico. The security camera proves they returned to the U.S. But investigators still have no idea where. On April 8th, they receive a call from 17-year-old Candice Canal. She has just received a missed call from her high school friend, Tracy Miles.
Candice Canal notified law enforcement and said, Tracy has called me on caller ID. This is the number that she called for.
Investigators are able to trace this number to a motel in downtown El Paso. Local police quickly move in and find Paul Nelson and Tracy Miles holed up together.
Tracy and Paul were both taken into custody without incident.
After a manhunt that has spanned over 700 miles across 4 states, the search is over. Paul and Tracy are brought back to Hutchinson, Kansas, separately. Paul is questioned first, but he only admits to stealing the VCR from Sandy's house.
Finally, I said, okay, Paul, you don't think that we flew all the way from Hutchinson, Kansas to El Paso, Texas to talk to you about a VCR? And that's when he dropped his head and started crying. And I knew right then.
Paul cracks and tells police what happened.
Tracy and Sandy had been fighting since the abortion over Paul and Tracy being with Paul.
On Wednesday, March 25th, Sandy threatened to take away Tracy's Mustang.
Tracy went ballistic, had a full-out fight with her mother on the Wednesday evening. So Paul and Tracy came to the conclusion that the only way out of the situation was to kill Sandy.
Paul explains Tracy left for school the next day while he hid inside Sandy's home, armed with a statue of a wooden bear.
Paul hit Sandy in the head. She was laying on the floor in the living room.
First he said he hit her once, and then we said, how many times, Paul? He said, I hit her 3 times.
They came up with the plan. Paul would kill Sandy, and then Tracy would be called. She'd come to the residence. They would make it, in their view, attempt to look like a robbery.
But the plan goes wrong.
He indicated that after he had struck Sandy in the head with the bear statue, that he had actually went in the bathroom, became ill, and was having troubles dealing with the situation. He said that she was still alive or making gurgling sounds when Tracy arrived.
Paul then drops a bombshell. Despite beating Sandy to the floor, he claims that Tracy is the real killer.
It's very hard for me to believe at that time that someone would premeditatedly kill their mother. It's just incomprehensible.
Investigators challenge Tracy with Paul's account.
The agent told Tracy that Paul said, "You're the one who did it." At that point, she gave a slight chuckle, said, "Yes, I went and got the cord and wrapped it around my mother's throat."
Tracy Miles admits that she strangled her own mother to death with a telephone cord. Paul and Tracy's actions after the killing leave detectives in no doubt that this was a callous, cold-blooded murder.
They took the VCR, they went back into the house and walked around Sandy's body. She was asked specifically as to why this murder occurred. She said on the 25th there had been a really bad argument between Tracy and her mother. Sandy was going to take Tracy's car away from her because of the ticket she had gotten, and the price of car insurance was being raised so high. And Tracy was extremely upset about that fact. She was not going to have her car taken away from her. She was basically stone-faced about it, that it happened, it needed to be done.
She showed no remorse and acted as if she didn't care one bit, and that she was glad it was done.
They just came to the conclusion jointly that this is what we need to do to be able to stay together and keep the Mustang.
2 weeks after the killing, Tracy Miles and Paul Nelson are charged with the murder of Sandy Miles. 17-year-old Tracy is charged as an adult.
I don't think it was bad that she was charged as an adult. She knew right from wrong.
For me specifically, in my little community, it wasn't just someone in town you knew of, you knew her. I think it shocked the whole community.
At the trial on March 1st, 1999, both Tracy and Paul plead no contest to the charges against them. They both receive life sentences.
I spoke for the family, and I asked the judge to sentence them to the longest time possible and have the sentences be consecutively.
There is certainly something in Tracy that is evil.
So we asked to go see her, and yeah, she showed no emotion. So we asked her why, but she couldn't tell us. The only thing I said was, your mom wanted so much more for you. She wanted you to make something of yourself, and that won't happen now.
Okay, everyone's saying happy
Despite the successful prosecution, Sandy's friends and family struggled to come to terms with what happened.
I never thought she'd be capable of being involved in anything like this. Normal people don't do that. No matter how mad or upset or angry they get. That's not what normal people do. That's how monsters behave, so.
Human beings are strange creatures. They perish for the most pathetic reasons you can imagine, and sometimes the people sworn to protect the truth are the ones most eager to bury it. I have spent a lifetime looking at the faces of the dead, and I tell you, every one of them has a story that refuses to stay silent. You think you know how a life ends? You think a label like overdose is enough to close the book? My, you have to be kidding me. Let's talk about Spencer Irwin, a 30-year-old man found in the dirt of a loading dock, stripped of his dignity and his clothes, left like a discarded piece of trash in the city of Fresno. The police arrived, took one look at the scene, and decided they had seen enough. They called it an overdose. They called it a closed case. They did not even bother with an autopsy. You have to be kidding me. You are talking about a human life, a son, and they treated it like paperwork to be filed and forgotten. It is an insult to the badge and an insult to the truth. The victim was a man who knew his own demons. He struggled with alcohol, yes, but he was a man who tried. He had a mother, Kelly, who possessed the one thing the authorities lacked, a spine. She knew her son. She knew he was not a man who lived his life in the shadows of drug dens. When the system tried to gaslight her, when they told her to accept a narrative that did not fit the facts, she did what a detective should have done from the very first minute. She hunted for the truth. Think about the sheer incompetence here. You find a man naked in the dirt, and you see what they call a snow angel pattern in the dust around his head and arms. They claimed it was a symptom of a desperate drug death. But as any seasoned investigator will tell you, nature is not that symmetrical. Nature is messy. That pattern was too perfect, too deliberate, and it screamed of a scene that had been staged by someone who did not understand the gravity of what they were doing. The arrogance of the criminal is only matched by the laziness of the investigator. Then there is the internal battle of the victim. Spencer was a man who reached out to help the broken, those lost in the cycle of homelessness, because he understood the weight of despair. He was a man with a gentle spirit, and yet he was caught in a trap of wrong place and wrong time. Contrast that with the shadows in his life, a man named Angel, a man living in his apartment when he should have been in rehab, a man who ghosted questions when the heat turned up, a white Kia Soul appearing on camera at 10 o'clock at night, turning off its lights like a thief in the night. You do not do that if you have nothing to hide. I look at the photos that the police refuse to properly analyze. I see that line under his jaw, that mark that could be a fold of skin, or the final, cold signature of a struggle. A forensic pathologist worth their salt would tell you that you cannot rule out a homicide without taking a look inside. You simply cannot. The authorities in Fresno took the path of least resistance. They saw a man who had struggled with alcohol, and they decided that was his fate. They did not look for the truth, because the truth requires work. And work is something some people try to avoid at all costs. It is a tragedy, not just because a young man died, but because his death was treated as inevitable. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when the people in charge decide that one life is worth less than another. Every time a detective decides to stop looking, a piece of justice dies with them. I tell you, this was not a natural end. This was a mystery that was begging to be solved, and it was shoved into a drawer. Kelly Irwin did not just lose her son. She had to fight a war against apathy just to be heard. And that, in my book, is the greatest crime of all. People are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for a reason so pathetic, so utterly minuscule, that it defies logic. You look at a case like this, and you think to yourself, how much is a human life worth? Apparently, in the minds of some, it is worth nothing more than a bag of white powder and a few desperate lies. I have spent a lifetime looking into the eyes of men who think they are clever, only to find that they are just children playing a dangerous game they do not understand. You have to be kidding me. Let's look at the facts, cold and hard. Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man with a life ahead of him, finds himself in the wrong place with the wrong people. He is not a criminal. He is an apprentice, a kid trying to find his way, a son who loved his family. Then you have the others, Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter. They claim their friend just panicked, jumped out of a vehicle, and vanished into the night like a ghost. They tell this story to the police at 3 a.m. like it is a grocery list. No panic, no tears, just a rehearsed script. I tell you, when a story sounds like a movie plot, it is because it is a work of fiction. The human mind is a fragile thing, but a guilty conscience is a wrecking ball. When the police finally dig, the truth starts to unravel. They were not passing through for a holiday. They were there to buy methamphetamine. The desperation in their actions, the changing stories, the burner phones, the claims of prayer while a man disappears. It reeks of a cover-up. They treat Cole not as a human being, but as a liability. Imagine the terror of that young man, realizing his so-called companions are not his friends, but people who view him as a loose end. He was smart. He could speak a bit Spanish. He picked up on the danger. That is the tragedy. He was a thinker in a room full of people who only understood the language of violence and deceit. Then you have the others who drift into this nightmare. Rudy and this character they call Gordo. The web gets wider. The lies get thicker. They treat the investigation like a shell game. They move the phones. They throw the drugs. They play their little games with the truth. But data does not lie. The digital breadcrumbs tell a story that their tongues refuse to utter. They moved together. They communicated. They coordinated. They had a plan, and when that plan went sideways, they acted like predators protecting their own skin. It is a sickening dance. The parents, Chris and Kathy, they do the work the world should have done for them. They show more dignity in their grief than these people ever showed in their lives. They offer money. They offer a chance for redemption. They drag the truth into the light. And still, these cowards remain silent. They fear their accomplices more than they fear the truth. They bury themselves in their own secrets, waiting for the day the clock runs out. What is left? A missing boy and a trail of cold, hard facts. You can lie to a detective. You can lie to a grand jury. But you cannot lie to the shadows that follow you. Someone knows. Someone remembers the sound of a door, the look in a pair of eyes, the place where they decided to throw away a human soul. They think they have gotten away with it, but justice is a patient hunter. It does not sleep, and it does not forget, and one day the truth will come out, not because of a confession, but because the evidence is a weight that eventually pulls even the deepest secret to the surface. It is a pathetic, miserable ending for a bright life. And I tell you, those who know the truth will carry it like a brand until the day they die. Human beings are peculiar creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you could ever imagine, and then they leave behind a trail of breadcrumbs, so confusing that even the devil himself would struggle to make sense of the path. You look at a case like the Jameson family, and you tell yourself, my, there has to be a logical explanation. But then you peel back the layers, the off-grid living, the claims of spirits, the piles of cash, and you realize that sometimes the truth is buried under so much human dysfunction that it simply stops making sense. I tell you, it is a sad state of affairs when a family looking for a fresh start ends up as nothing more than a cautionary tale on a remote mountain. They were chasing a dream, a shipping container in the wilderness, a quiet life, a departure from the noise of the modern world. But dreams have a funny way of curdling when they are built on a foundation of chemical dependency and, if you believe the reports, a descent into something far more irrational. You have a mother, Sherilyn, struggling with her own mind, trapped in a cycle of medication and misery, and a father, Bobby, who seems to have been dragged into the same dark whirlpool. You have to be kidding me if you think that environment was ever going to lead to anything but a catastrophe. When I look at the facts of that day in October, the inconsistencies are enough to turn your hair white. You find a truck locked tight with the keys still in the ignition. That is not a sign of a struggle. That is a sign of a departure that was either forced or utterly, bafflingly unplanned. And the dog, poor, starving little thing, left to wither away in that metal box. That is not something a parent does. That is something a person who has completely lost their grip on reality, or someone who was interrupted by a predator, would do. The letter, that scathing, hateful document found in the truck. You read that, and you see the internal rot of marriage that had clearly crossed the point of no return. You see the accusation of attempted murder, the talk of demons, the absolute vitriol. It reads like a final scream into the void. Some people want to pin it on a murder-suicide, pointing to Sherilyn's history and her erratic behavior. But the logistics simply do not hold up. You do not leave the money, you do not leave the keys, and you do not walk miles into rugged, unforgiving terrain with a child just to vanish into thin air. That does not fit the profile of a premeditated act. That fits the profile of a situation where someone else arrived on the scene and decided their fate. For them, then you have the local element, the people living off the grid, the men like Dan Clemens. You look at his history, or the history of man with his name, and it makes your skin crawl. Voluntary manslaughter? A man found shot to death in California? It makes you wonder what kind of secrets that mountain is holding. They say follow the money, and that is exactly what I would do. That $32,000 was a siren song in an area where people were scraping by in the mud. It is entirely possible that this family stumbled into a nest of vipers. People who saw an easy mark, a family lost in their own problems, and took advantage of the isolation to commit a crime that they knew they would get away with because no one was watching. The tragedy of it all is the little girl Madison. She never stood a chance in that equation. Whether it was the demons in her parents' heads or the very real monsters walking that mountain, her life was cut short by the absolute worst of human nature. The fact that the remains were found years later, miles from the vehicle, only proves that they did not go there to die on their own terms. They were moved, they were hidden, and they were forgotten by a system that finds it far too easy to label a case as undetermined when the work of finding justice gets too difficult. I have spent my life looking into the eyes of killers, and I have seen the same thing every time: an utter disregard for the sanctity of a human life. It is cold, it is calculated, and it is entirely pathetic. Somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened on that mountain. They know why that truck was left, they know who took the money, and they know the last moments of that family. They are living their lives, perhaps thinking they got away with it. But the truth has a way of surfacing, even if it takes years. Even if it takes a hunter stumbling upon a skull in the brush. You can bury the bodies, you can bury the evidence, but you cannot bury the fact that a crime was committed, and justice, no matter how delayed, is a debt that the universe eventually collects. If you have any information regarding this case, please do not stay silent. The Latimer County Sheriff's Office is the point of contact. Justice for the Jameson family is long overdue. Is there a specific element of the criminal investigation or a particular theory regarding the mountain residents that you would like me to analyze further? My. You see, the thing about human beings is that they are the only creatures on this earth who will lie to themselves even when the truth is screaming directly in their faces. You look at a case like this, and you want to find a reason. You want a motive. You want some grand, cinematic explanation for why a man would reach out and snuff out a life that had barely begun. But there is no grand design here. There is only a void, a dark, empty space where a human soul should have been. I tell you, the cowardice of David Meyerhofer is enough to make a man lose his faith in everything. He lived a life of quiet deception, moving through the world like a shadow, keeping his secrets in a freezer, while pretending to be the helpful local, the man next door. You have to be kidding me. a man who spends his time building things as a carpenter, yet spends his nights dismantling the lives of children. It is a perversion of nature. Think about the victims. Little Susie Yeager, 12 years old, just trying to sleep in a tent, dreaming of mountain air, only to have that peace shattered by a man who saw her not as a person, but as a prize to be collected and discarded. She was a child, and she deserved the safety of her family. Yet she was stolen away by a creature who feared nothing more than being caught. And that mother, Marietta, my heart aches for her. She walked through a valley of shadows for years, holding on to a tape recorder, waiting for a call that was really just a performance by a monster. She clung to the hope that her daughter was alive because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. And that is a kind of agony that words cannot fully capture. When you analyze a predator like Meyerhofer, you see the classic hallmarks. He was a collector of souvenirs. He kept those items, the blouse, the lipstick, the necklace, because he needed to hold on to the power he had stolen. He was a man who felt so small in the real world that he had to invent a world where he was the one in control, the one who held the keys to life and death. He tried to insert himself into the investigation, which is a hallmark of an arrogant mind. He thought he was smarter than the badge. He thought he could outrun the truth. But the truth is a stubborn thing. It does not go away just because you bury it in an outhouse or burn it in a pile of ash. What strikes me most is the total disconnect between his actions and his reality. He confessed to crimes that had been haunting the community for years, yet he denied the ones that would have made him a monster in his own eyes. He had a list, a literal list of camps and targets. That is not the work of a man acting on impulse. That is the work of a man who has made evil his career. And yet he died in a jail cell, taking his final secrets with him. He robbed the families of their final answers, just like he robbed the victims of their futures. People always ask me, how do you handle it? How do you look at the evidence and not lose your mind? You have to keep a cold, clinical distance. You have to view the crime as a puzzle, a series of cold, hard facts that eventually point to a single point of failure. But beneath that, you never, ever forget who you are working for. You work for the victims who can no longer speak for themselves. You work for the ones who have been silenced. Meyerhofer thought he could win, but he lost the only game that mattered. He lost the ability to be remembered as anything other than a pathetic, murderous stain on the landscape of Montana. That is his legacy, and that is all he gets. For several days. This specific detail stopped Rosie cold. She knew her brother intimately. My brother was never, absolutely ever, without his phone, she thought. He was a busy man who was just always securely attached to his device. It went absolutely everywhere with him, like an extension of his own arm. It was precisely at that specific point in the conversation where Rosie truly felt like something very dark, very sinister, was secretly going on behind the scenes. She did not know what it was yet, but her intuition screamed that the story was wrong. Seeking to understand practical matters, Steve's sister Rosie politely asked his widow Lana about the status of his last will and testament. Steve and Rosie had sat down and talked many times over the years about exactly what it was that he wanted to do with his estate and his remains when that inevitable time came. He had specifically and repeatedly stated that he deeply wanted to be buried in a certain beautiful, peaceful cemetery down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. However, when Rosie asked Lana about executing these wishes, Lana flatly stated that there was no will to be found. Furthermore, Lana had already rapidly made her own permanent arrangements. She declared that Steve was officially due to be cremated locally, completely ignoring his wishes for burial, and that she was already actively planning a local memorial service for him. On the 4th of August, 2018, a beautifully dressed Lana held a formal memorial service to honor Steve right at their sweeping lakeside home. It was a highly emotional gathering. Absolutely everybody in attendance felt such a deep, profound connection to the man they had lost. The friends and family found it incredibly hard to stay calm and composed. Even though the elegant gathering was purposefully supposed to be an uplifting celebration of his vibrant life, the attendees just could not help but feel the deep, deep sorrow that radiated through the crowd. The officiant spoke softly, acknowledging the heavy hearts, saying that if there was ever any safe space where it was perfectly okay to be sad and to cry a little bit, this gathering was that time. He gently added that he believed it was perfectly okay today that they celebrate a life so wonderfully well lived, while at the exact same time allowing themselves to be deeply sad about his sudden departure. However, amidst the tears of the memorial, Rosie and the extended family were highly surprised and slightly appalled to discover that Lana had already efficiently started to clear out all of Steve's personal belongings in just a matter of days. She had already systematically begun taking all of his expensive clothes out of the house. All of his cherished personal items were suddenly gone. She smoothly explained that she had generously donated all of them to a local charity. Rosie felt like she was almost knocked completely off her feet by the sheer speed of the erasure of her brother. It was a gut-wrenching feeling to open a door and see the sheer number of empty wooden hangers rattling in that massive walk-in closet, with not a single solitary stitch of his vibrant clothing left behind. The family also quickly noticed that a lot of Steve's expensive, collectible watches were entirely missing from their display cases. A lot of his unique, valuable jewelry was missing from the safe. Most disturbingly of all to his loved ones, his sacred wedding ring was missing. Coupled with the rapid disposal of his life, Lana's steadfast claims about Steve not having a written will raise the family's quiet suspicions to a boiling point. That legal document was something that Steve and Rosie, and Steve and many of his close business associates, had discussed at length. He was a man who deeply understood the vital importance of making absolutely sure that everything in his complex life was always in perfect order. To Rosie, there was absolutely no logic whatsoever in the ridiculous claim that her brother, a man trained as a meticulous accountant, a wealthy person who was notoriously fastidious with his vast finances, would pass away without having an ironclad will in place. The grieving family collectively felt like something in the story simply was not adding up. They held a private meeting and realized they were all entirely on the same exact page here. They knew deep in their bones that something terrible was going on. Acting on this powerful intuition, that was when they made the crucial phone call to the local medical examiner's office. They practically begged the officials, saying, "Hey, please do a full, comprehensive autopsy on his body before it's too late." They pleaded that at the very, very least, if the county was not going to authorize a full autopsy, they must absolutely run a complete, thorough toxicology panel on his blood, facing the united front of a concerned family. The medical examiner generously agreed to halt the cremation and proceed with the requested tests. Simultaneously, a sharp investigator named Detective Motes of the York County Sheriff's Office was also officially notified of the family as growing vocal suspicions regarding the bizarre circumstances surrounding Steve's sudden death. He stepped into the case with a polite good morning to everybody, bringing a calm, professional eye to the tragedy. But when the initial findings from the autopsy report finally came into the station, it seemingly dashed the family's theories. The preliminary paperwork listed standard signs of underlying heart disease and pointed confidently to a tragic death caused entirely by natural causes. The medical professionals noted that the initial physical autopsy still strongly showed that it was highly likely the man had suffered a massive, fatal heart attack. However, the diligent detectives knew that they still had to wait patiently for the highly detailed toxicologist's report to come back from the state lab to finally make a definitive, actual, legally binding finding. They were warned it would take a few agonizing weeks before those complex chemical results would arrive. So, the family and the detectives waited on absolute pins and needles for the ultimate truth to finally come out into the light. Through all the waiting, the family held strong to their belief. They just knew that there was something deeply, terribly wrong. When the final comprehensive toxicology report on Steve Clayton's blood finally came back to the detective's desk, the results were absolutely shocking. The chemical analysis clearly showed the undeniable traces of several strong sedatives swimming in the system. The list included substances like marijuana, powerful prescription sleep aids, and heavy doses of allergy medication. But as concerning as those sedatives were, that was not all the lab found. The single biggest, most terrifying shock buried in the detailed toxicology results was the massive presence of a chemical compound called tetrahydrozoline. In medical circles, it is commonly known by its abbreviation, but it is universally recognized as the active, key ingredient found in standard over-the-counter eye drops. It is a soothing chemical found in common little plastic bottles sitting in medicine cabinets across the country. This specific chemical is absolutely not ever meant to be safely ingested by a human being. The medical experts explained to the horrified detectives that if it is secretly given to someone in very small doses, it makes the unsuspecting victim feel intensely, violently ill. It makes the person incredibly nauseous. It makes them terribly dizzy and disoriented. It will systematically make them pass out eventually as their blood pressure plummets. But when it is maliciously administered in large, concentrated quantities, it is highly, undeniably deadly. It forcefully shuts your entire central nervous system down. And without immediate medical intervention, it will kill you. The detectives further learned from the medical experts that this specific chemical acts quickly to drastically limit the vital blood supply flowing to the heart and other critical organs. This sudden, massive restriction is exactly what leads directly to a catastrophic heart attack. Suddenly, the initial coroner's physical findings made perfect, terrifying sense. The detectives quickly pulled up the archived body camera footage from the terrible morning of the death. When the digital video panned around the upstairs master bedroom, the detectives froze the frame. There, sitting innocuously on the tall wooden dresser, was a small plastic bottle of eye drops. Crucially, the dresser was located all the way across the large room, positioned far away from the bed. That was a spot where a man as dizzy, weak, and violently ill as Steve could not possibly get up and walk to retrieve it himself. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together. Now, it was very abundantly clear to law enforcement. This was absolutely not a natural death. Armed with this dark, undeniable chemical evidence, Detective Motes knew he urgently needed to have a very serious, recorded talk with the grieving widow, Lana Clayton. Exactly 5 weeks after the supposedly sudden, tragic death of her beloved husband, Lana Clayton found herself sitting in an austere interview room, being formally questioned by seasoned detectives. They started softly, casually framing the conversation by saying they just needed her help, acting as if she were merely a helpful witness in this confusing case for them. The detectives carefully guided the conversation, stating they wanted to know more about the specific medications and supplements they had officially found in Steve's blood during the autopsy. Lana nodded cooperatively, offering up innocent explanations. She leaned forward, adopting a helpful tone, and said she knew exactly what he would say about the drugs. She freely admitted that he regularly took allergy pills to help him sleep. She rattled off a fairly long list of benign, standard medications. But notably, throughout her entire cooperative explanation, there was absolutely no mention whatsoever of the eye drop chemical, the very drug that the lab proved had killed Steve. The terrifying reality of this specific liquid is that it is completely colorless. It is entirely odorless, and it is completely tasteless. These 3 stealthy traits are exactly what tragically makes it the absolute perfect weapon to secretly give to someone if you maliciously want to slowly poison them without raising their suspicions. The lab report showed that the concentrated level of this chemical found in Steve's blood was so incredibly high that it was mathematically, scientifically clear that it was a direct, primary cause of his death. It was a massive, undeniably lethal level. No matter what creative way a defense attorney might try to look at it, it was murder by poison. Knowing they had her trapped by science, the detectives began to press on harder. They dropped the friendly facade and confronted her with the baffling lab results. They stated firmly that somehow or another, There was a massively large amount of eye drop chemical found deep in his system. They leaned over the table, making direct eye contact, and stated that finding out exactly how that poison got there was what they were urgently trying to get to the bottom of today. Cornered, Lana's helpful demeanor subtly shifted. She desperately searched for a plausible explanation. She suddenly blurted out that she knew he voluntarily put the eye drops directly into his morning coffee. She claimed with a straight face that he bizarrely put it in there every single day of his life. The detectives, incredulous at this absurd medical claim, asked her directly what she specifically knew about the physical effects of drinking the chemical. Lana stumbled over her words, stammering, "What do I know about it? I know it makes you have severe diarrhea." At this critical juncture, there were basically only two logical theories that the police were now seriously considering for the official case file. Theory number one was that he was intentionally, maliciously poisoned by another person, indicating clear foul play and premeditated murder. Theory number two was a highly unlikely scenario that he willingly and knowingly ingested a massive, fatal amount of the foul-tasting chemical entirely on his own. Whether it was an intentional act of self-harm or a bizarre, tragic mistake. But as the police began to deeply probe the complex reality of Steve and Lana's intimate relationship, seeking a motive, a new, darker narrative began to emerge from the widow. The detectives gently asked her, "How has your daily life truly been behind closed doors?" Lana looked down at her hands and sighed, weaving a tale of hidden misery. She claimed that while sometimes they would have genuine fun and everything seemed perfect, other times she felt like she would constantly be walking on fragile eggshells around his explosive temper. She emphasized the point, claiming, "All the time I was nervously walking on eggshells." Lana boldly claimed to the skeptical detectives that the beloved Jolly Steve actually had a deeply hidden, frightening dark side that he kept hidden from his family. She stated that behind closed doors, he could be really, truly nasty to her. When the detective pressed her, asking what exactly a nasty Steve looked and sounded like, she immediately claimed that he was really verbally abusive toward her, constantly belittling her and calling her cruel names. When asked for specific examples of what terrible things he would call her, she hesitated, then offered up generic insults, claiming he would call her stupid or use profanity, saying, "I do not know," just all kinds of mean things. She painted a picture of rising domestic terror, claiming she could constantly see his irrational anger escalating until you would just notice it and just, try and quickly stay out of his destructive way. Immediately after Lana's revealing and highly accusatory interview concluded, the detectives wasted no time. They officially ordered a comprehensive, top-to-bottom forensic search of the massive lakeside house. The crime scene technicians were specifically instructed to go looking for any used cups or drinking glasses that might still have a tiny, telltale chemical residue dried in the bottom of them. They were frantically looking for absolutely anything they could possibly find in the massive house that would firmly help them determine exactly what physical mechanism could have been used to cause this poisoning. Furthermore, the financial investigators were digging through the office, looking for absolutely anything document-wise, like hidden journals or angry emails, that would definitively show proof of the severe trouble in the marriage that Lana had just alleged. But surprisingly, during that intense period of searching, Lana suddenly reached out to the officers guarding the property. She told the station officer that she urgently wanted to speak again, face-to-face, with Detective Motes. When the detective arrived, he activated his recorder, ready to officially document exactly what Lana had to say this time. Lana began to frantically escalate her previous claims of abuse. She tearfully told the detective that she had only told him a little bit about Stephen earlier, but that the reality of their marriage was far, far worse than what she had initially told you. She now wildly claimed that he was not only verbally cruel, but also physically abusive toward her. She acted out scenarios, claiming he would scream Lana, for God's sake, and violently yell at her and call her terrible names. She painted a picture of a man out of control, saying his anger just constantly built up, over nothing. She claimed she would do something incredibly minor that would irritate him, and the tension would rise until the terrifying point where he would just completely explode in a fit of rage, aggressively asking her what she was trying to do. Then, she expertly pivoted her story to the fateful week of his death. She claimed that after he had experienced that initial medical incident in the yard, which he had innocently said was just vertigo, she was dutifully playing the good nurse, patiently taking care of him and doing everything for him. But, she confessed, deep down inside, she was secretly still so incredibly angry at him for his years of supposed abuse. She then introduced a chilling new detail. She claimed that a trusted girlfriend of hers at her medical workplace had once casually told her a dark secret. The friend allegedly said that if you ever want to get even with somebody who has wronged you, just secretly put some eye drops into their drink, because it will reliably cause them embarrassing diarrhea. It was right then, sitting in the quiet room with the detective, that Lana finally dropped a massive, case-breaking bombshell. She quietly confessed that on that Saturday morning, when she saw that small plastic bottle of eye drops sitting right there on the table, the dark advice just suddenly came rushing back to her mind. She admitted that she just gave in to the dark impulse, took the bottle, and squirted the clear liquid. The detective leaned in close, his voice perfectly steady, and asked her exactly what she had squirted the chemical into. Lana looked down and whispered, "Into his drinking water." The detective repeated, "Into his water?" He then carefully asked about the dosage, noting that she claimed she did not know the full, exact amount, asking if she meant she just gave the bottle a little squeeze. Lana shook her head slowly, her voice barely audible, and confessed, "I think I put the whole thing in." The detective, confirming the lethal dose, asked, "So the whole bottle?" Lana nodded, admitting, "I think I did. I remember I squeezed it really hard." She tried to frame it as a crime of sudden, uncontrollable passion, claiming she just saw it sitting there, and she just did it without thinking. Sensing the interview was concluding, the detective asked her calmly what her immediate plans for the evening were now. Lana seemed entirely deflated, softly replying that she would just stay here at the house. The detective, playing the calm professional, told her she would be okay, acknowledging that he knew this was a whole lot of heavy stress on her plate right now. Lana suddenly seemed to grasp the monumental gravity of her confession, frantically asking the detective, "Just what if I do? What if I am the one who actually caused his death with the eye drops?" The detective remained stoic, simply asking if there was anything else, any other dark secret, that she wanted to officially add to her statement. Lana shook her head, whispering no. He offered her one last chance, saying if there's more, now is the time to safely get off your chest. Lana firmly replied that that was it. It was a completely damning, legally binding confession to a deadly act. But legally, the detectives could not securely arrest Lana right at that exact moment. They needed to finalize the paperwork. So, after Lana comprehensively confessed to the poisoning, the police temporarily left the residence. They systematically went back to the station and got all of their legal ducks in a perfect row as far as exactly what specific criminal charges would be officially made against her. They prepared the heavy documents, fully ready to drive back to the house the very next morning to officially place Lana Clayton under arrest for the murder of her husband. But early that next morning, before the detectives could even leave the station, the dispatch center received a frantic, terrifying call from one of Lana's close lakeside neighbors. The horrified neighbor reported that they had just found several handwritten notes of suicide scattered around. They told the police they were terribly afraid that Lana had already severely harmed herself in the night. The police quickly realized what had happened. Lana clearly knew the police were coming back for her the very next day, and she knew with absolute certainty that they would have signed warrants for her arrest. Unable to face the music, she had turned the dangerous gas on inside the house, calmly walked upstairs to her bedroom, and swallowed a massive handful of pills in a desperate attempt to tragically kill herself. First responders smashed into the house and successfully found her lying completely unconscious in her bed. She was immediately loaded into an ambulance and rushed directly into the local hospital, where she was forcefully treated for the overdose and ultimately medically cleared and released by the doctors. And then, the very second she was discharged from a medical facility, she was immediately placed in steel handcuffs and formally arrested on the extremely serious charges of first-degree murder and the malicious tampering with food items. The extended Clayton family was promptly informed by the authorities of Lana's shocking arrest. A kind detective from York County personally called Nick French on his cell phone. The detective said, "Hey, Nick, I just want to bring you up to speed on everything happening here." He then delivered the crushing blow. Lana officially confessed to poisoning your uncle. Nick recalled at the moment he heard those words. He pulled his car over the side of the road right away. He said the sheer weight of betrayal hit him like a massive, crushing ton of bricks. He described the emotional impact as feeling literally like taking a solid wooden baseball bat straight to the face. The shock was absolute. He immediately picked up his phone and called his mother. As soon as she answered the phone, he could hear his Aunt Rosie already on the other end of the line in the background, absolutely screaming in pure, agonizing horror that she killed him. The legal process dragged on slowly, but eventually, on the 16th of January in the year 2020, Lana Clayton made a calculated legal move. She formally accepted a negotiated plea deal from the state prosecutors. Standing in a quiet courtroom, she officially admitted her guilt on the lesser charges of voluntary manslaughter and illegal tampering with a drug or food product. The original grand jury indictment had been for premeditated murder, but she was now pleading out to a lesser, but still severe, offense. In her defense statements, Lana continued to cling to her bizarre narrative. She claimed that her only knowledge of the eye drop chemical was gleaned simply by watching silly Hollywood comedy movies, where it was always falsely depicted merely as a harmless cause of temporary stomach discomfort and diarrhea. Lana forcefully insisted to the judge that she never, ever truly intended for Steve to actually die, and maintained that she had merely wanted some petty revenge for his alleged emotional abuse. But absolutely none of Steve's lifelong friends and deeply devoted family members bought that ridiculous story for a single second. No one who knew the man believed that Steve was ever abusive in his life. The family felt deeply that Lana was maliciously trying to posthumously assassinate Steve's sterling character simply to save her own skin. This was proven out because numerous other people who truly knew him well, especially the many young men who he had so generously mentored over the years, eagerly came forward to the prosecutors to testify that he was an absolutely wonderful, kind-hearted person. They universally swore there was absolutely no abuse of any sort associated with Stephen. The family saw right through her lies. They knew she was just desperately trying to do absolutely whatever she could illegally save herself from serving a very, very, very long prison sentence, and to successfully dodge the terrifying possibility of the state seeking the death penalty. They knew in their hearts that Steve was a gentle soul, a big teddy bear of a man who was simply not physically or emotionally capable of harming someone he loved. Furthermore, the hard scientific evidence completely destroyed Lana's timeline of accidental death. Based on a deep analysis of the detailed toxicology report, the medical prosecutors firmly believed that Steve had actually suffered in pure agony for 3 full days before finally dying. The lead prosecutor pointed out that Lana had explicitly told the police that she administered the single, fatal dose on that Saturday morning. But the prosecutor argued, "We know as an undeniable matter of scientific fact from the expert toxicologist that her timeline is medically impossible. If he had ingested that massive, fatal dose on Saturday morning, he would have died almost instantly on Saturday morning. The fact that he'd been so violently ill for all of that time prior strongly, undeniably indicates that she continually, maliciously gave him the medication hidden in his food and drink throughout that entire agonizing time. She had methodically, coldly poisoned him with the eye drops, little by little, day after day. And the most damning fact of all was that Lana, a highly trained, registered medical nurse. Never once sought to call for professional medical help for him after the initial, debilitating poisoning began. The family pointed to the tragic state of the bedroom as ultimate proof of his helplessness. They knew Stephen would never, ever have willingly stayed laying down in a foul, urine-soaked mattress. He was famously known as a meticulous clean freak who loved order and hygiene. He would absolutely not have stood for such a degrading thing for a single minute. The only reason he stayed in that bed was because the repeated poisonings had made him entirely too weak to even get up and move his own body. And the isolation was complete. The family realized with horror that there was no easily accessible cell phone left in the house for him to use, as Lana had conveniently hidden it. There was no traditional landline installed in the bedroom, so he could possibly call somebody, anybody, for rescue. So this terrifying setup put the proud, strong man into a horrific situation of essentially being slowly, methodically tortured to death in his own bed, with absolutely no physical way to get help from the outside world. And so the family believed, finally, when Lana knew that Saturday had arrived, she decided that was it. She wanted it over. And so she took that plastic bottle and squeezed that entire, massive amount of poison directly into his drinking water. She handed him the glass, watched him drink it, and then casually walked out the front door to peacefully mow the green grass in the sunshine. She did that specifically so she did not have to stay inside and watch the agonizing horror of his final moments of death. The family wept, realizing that instead of being a loving nurse that helps the sick to Steve, she was truly the deceptive nurse sent straight from hell. At the conclusion of the emotional hearing, the 53-year-old Lana Clayton was officially sentenced by the judge to serve 25 hard years in a state prison facility. To the very end, she never, absolutely never, took true responsibility or fully admitted that she had deliberately intended to kill Steve. But the cold, hard facts of the scientific evidence conclusively showed the world otherwise. For the grieving family, justice felt hollow. Nick expressed the family as collective sorrow, stating that he truly felt like there was absolutely no legal penalty in the world that would have ever been great enough to properly punish Lana for what she did. He looked at the tragedy and saw it for what it was. This was 3 horrifying days of her coldly, methodically poisoning his absolute best friend in the world, and then finally killing him. Nick shuddered when he thought about the dark, calculated thought process that had to go into her mind to successfully put on this elaborate, loving charade for the family, all while secretly killing him. And the terrifying part was that she effortlessly carried that deceptive performance right on through till the very end, playing the grieving widow perfectly. Nick firmly stated that he believed that level of cold deception is the absolute, textbook definition of a true monster. And the most terrifying thought that kept the family awake at night was the realization that Lana had almost completely gotten away with the perfect murder. There almost was not a full, proper autopsy conducted on the body. The family knew that if they had not loudly demanded action, if there had not been a comprehensive autopsy forced by their suspicions, the official, final ruling of the county coroner would simply have been that this was likely just a very hard medical episode, and that his untimely passing was solely due to entirely natural causes. The absolute truth of the matter was that Lana ultimately brought her own downfall upon herself through her sheer, blinding greed. The family noted that had she just remained the same quiet, gentle, unassuming Lana they all thought they knew, simply grieving the sad, natural loss of her older husband, not a single person in the world would have ever had any dark suspicion whatsoever. Although Lana stubbornly, continuously insists from her prison cell that Steve's tragic death was entirely unintentional. His devoted family and the aggressive state prosecution firmly, undeniably believe it was a cold, highly deliberate act of murder, and the driving motive behind the poison was as old as time itself, pure, unadulterated financial gain. The prosecutors argued that the one incredibly obvious and glaring motive sitting right in the center of the room was Steve's massive, accumulated wealth. They pointed out the legal reality that, without a valid written will properly filed in the state of South Carolina, absolutely everything a person owns legally goes directly to their surviving spouse. So, a smart, calculating woman like Lana would easily know the law. If Steve is suddenly gone and the will is suddenly missing, I automatically get absolutely everything he spent his whole life building. The family realized with a sickening dread that if somebody truly wanted to do something incredibly malicious and greedy like this, all they practically had to do was secretly destroy the existing will, and then suddenly his entire fortune rightfully belonged entirely to them. It was a terrifyingly simple, deadly plan. With the legal battle finally over and the truth exposed to the light, the devastated Clayton family now tries every day to slowly move on with their lives without Steve's massive, warm presence in their daily world. But his memory is everywhere they look. When they gather, someone will inevitably mimic his famous, booming entrance, shouting hello, 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 bringing a bittersweet smile to everyone's face. Rosie deeply misses her big brother. She often says, I miss a whole lot of things about Steve, but I truly, deeply miss his loud, comforting voice. I just miss hearing his voice calling my name. She remembers his wedding toast, how he joked that laughing was his way of, getting away from the heavy emotional stuff, and she tries to laugh through her own tears now to honor him. Nick reflects on his lost uncle, saying that he thinks what he misses most about Steve is his completely over-the-top, wonderful personality. He misses that big, incredibly boisterous, highly gregarious character that could effortlessly enter any dull room and just immediately, joyfully take over absolutely everything with his energy. The entire family universally agrees that Steve was a truly amazing, generous person. It has been incredibly, agonizingly difficult for all of them navigating a quieter world without him happily around. For Rosie, the ultimate loss is the joy he brought to life. She states firmly that the one single thing she misses the absolute most about Steve is his booming, infectious laughter. She misses his unique, magical ability to instantly light up a dark room just by walking into it. The family holds on to the profound, painful truth. Stephen was cruelly, unfairly stolen from absolutely everyone in the world who loved him. Steve was stolen from everyone who loved him. But while his physical life was tragically cut short by betrayal, the immense love he so freely gave out to the world and the countless bright, happy memories he created with his family will absolutely never, ever be erased. The gentle breeze of the Atlantic Ocean in Miami drifted softly across the lush, green palm trees, carrying with it the salt air and the joyful anticipation of a truly momentous day. It was the 10th of March in the year 2007, a day that the Clayton family would cherish forever. The air was filled with laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and eyes sparkling with genuine happiness. This was the wedding day of Rosemary Clayton, known affectionately by everyone as Rosie. After years of waiting and hoping, she finally wore her elegant white bridal gown, ready to walk toward the man of her dreams, William Leslie. Among the vibrant and joyful crowd, one figure stood out for his tall, steady presence. This was Steve Clayton, the eldest brother of Rosie. At the age of 52, Steve was not only a successful businessman, but also the guiding light and the sturdy pillar of the family. He had taken on the role of a father figure with immense grace and love after the passing of their own father 11 months prior. Rosie stood before the mirror, adjusting the lace of her gown, her eyes misting with tears of nostalgia as she remembered the moment she had asked her big brother to walk her down the aisle in place of their father. She remembered that day as if it were yesterday. She had shed many tears, but Steve had held her close, comforting her with a strength that had defined his entire life. When their parents had married, Steve was only a young boy of 2 or 3 years of age. He grew up alongside 4 sisters, and Rosie was the youngest. The age gap of 10 years had never caused them to drift apart. On the contrary, in the eyes of Rosie, Steve was always a hero. From the days of high school, we played football and wrestled. The image of her big, strong brother had been permanently etched into her heart. The melodic music began to swell, signaling the arrival of the most sacred moment. Steve offered his arm to Rosie, and together they walked with measured, respectful steps toward the altar. Every eye in the room was fixed upon them with admiration. The minister smiled warmly and asked, "Who is the person presenting this bride to this groom?" The voice of Steve was deep, warm, and filled with profound depth of emotion as he answered, "It is I, along with all the cherished memories of our father." It was a deeply moving moment for the Clayton family. Gathering for such a joyous occasion, while missing the presence of their father, was a significant feeling. Yet the presence of Steve, with his boundless love and support, filled that void completely. After the formal rituals concluded, the evening reception erupted into a celebration filled with laughter. Steve always knew how to bring out the best in people. He was not only brilliant in the world of business, but also possessed an innate sense of humor that could light up any room. After graduating from college with a degree in finance, Steve had co-founded a company called Physical Therapy Resources with a close friend. From a modest beginning, he had developed it into a national corporation with centers spanning across the country. Steve had worked tirelessly, rising to the peak of his career, and eventually decided to sell his shares. His original goal was to retire by the age of 40, but he missed that by a single year. At the age of 41, Steve officially moved into a new chapter of his life, ready to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Leaving the bustling world of business provided Steve with an abundance of free time. Instead of merely enjoying alone, he chose to give back. He became a mentor to a multitude of young people, guiding them as they started their own businesses or sought direction in their lives. The generosity of Steve was not limited to his financial resources. More importantly, it was the time and dedication he poured into others that truly mattered. At the dinner table, Rosie held her camera, pointing it toward her brother as he playfully teased their Uncle Max. Steve told jokes continuously, causing everyone to roar with laughter. "You know," Rosie whispered into the camera, "this is truly special. Our father was not this funny. He was far more serious. He was always so earnest." When it came time for the family speeches, no one was surprised when Steve was the first to stand with his glass of champagne. He was always the life of the party, the first to raise his voice to celebrate those he loved. "Greetings to everyone here." His voice rang out, clear and vibrant, immediately easing any tension. Everyone knew that the speeches given by Steve were never prepared in advance. They always came directly from the heart, honest and filled with raw emotion. He looked around the room, eventually resting his gaze on the groom. "William, thank you so much. I will not look directly at you, because if I do, I will surely cry. This is my way of avoiding the overly emotional moments." The entire room erupted in laughter. Steve took a deep breath, and his tone softened, becoming more serious and warm than ever before. "Thank you for making my sister so happy. And before her father passed away, he told me to take care of my sister and honor her. He loved you very much, Rosie." Steve reached up to gently wipe his eyes, attempting to regain his usual light-hearted demeanor. "All right, I must become serious again. I am fine. You two are a wonderful match. You are perfect companions. And my sister, I have never seen her smile as brightly as she does today." Following the heartfelt speech that brought tears to the eyes of many, the atmosphere settled to make way for the dance between father and daughter. Since their father was no longer there, Steve stepped up once again. He approached and took the hand of Rosie. However, as they prepared to move to the rhythm of the music, a grand surprise unfolded. The sound system did not play the standard song. Instead, it broadcast the warm, familiar voice of their late father from an old recording. "The most wonderful moment of my day was when you climbed onto my knee." The voice from the past resonated, clear and overflowing with love. "You used to say, 'Daddy, I love you.' I miss those days. I truly do, because I love you too." Tears streamed down the cheeks of Rosie. She leaned her head onto the shoulder of her brother. Steve held his sister tightly, his own eyes brimming with emotion. On that day, He had played so many roles: a father figure, a devoted groomsman, an entertainer, the one who kept everyone calm, and the one who made everyone shed tears of joy. He did everything in an entirely natural way, with all of his heart, despite his great success and wide network of family and friends. The romantic journey of Steve had not been entirely smooth. He had always sought a partner who shared his focus and determination, yet who was also as full of love and care as he was. That was a high standard to meet. At the age of 52, his family believed it would require someone truly unique to win the heart of this man. Everyone understood that Steve was looking for someone with whom he could connect on every level, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. 3 years after the wedding of Rosie, a major turning point occurred. Toward the end of the year 2009, Steve decided to leave the busy state of Florida to seek a new, slower, and more tranquil pace of life in North Carolina. Steve was a person who loved movement. He enjoyed walking, breathing in the fresh air, and possessed a special passion for outdoor activities. Moving to North Carolina gave him the opportunity to immerse himself in nature more than ever before. And then, within just a few short months of settling in, Steve excitedly announced to his family that he had met someone special. For the first time in many years, he seemed to radiate a new light. He carried an aura of positive energy, looking vibrant and incredibly enthusiastic. The name of that woman was Lana Walsh, 12 years younger than Steve. She was a nurse who had grown up in the peaceful lands of Oklahoma. Upon meeting the Clayton family for the first time, Lana left the impression of a woman who was exceptionally calm, quiet, but who radiated sweetness, kindness, and genuine decency. Her tranquility provided a perfect, unintentional contrast to Steve. If the personality of Steve was like a brilliant, boisterous, and energetic volcano, then Lana was like a cool, refreshing stream, quiet but profoundly deep. Regardless of their differences in personality, Steve knew for certain that she was a piece of the puzzle he had always been searching for. They always expressed their affection in a natural and sincere way. No matter where they went, they walked arm in arm. Steve was always hugging her, teasing her, and bestowing upon her radiant smiles. Seeing her brother so happy, Rosie felt joy in her own heart. She opened her arms to welcome Lana into the family. Because anyone that Steve loved, the Clayton family would also love. Not long after, Steve invited Lana to move in with him. With his characteristic sincerity and his talent for persuasion, Steve convinced Lana to move to Charlotte. Their home soon welcomed new members who were absolutely adorable. The first dog they adopted was Guinness, a small, agile Italian greyhound. They both loved the breed so much that they soon decided to welcome another little dog and named her Sadie. Ever since Lana entered his life, Steve felt he had found true peace. He always had glowing things to say about her, referring to her by the affectionate name of his Lana Sue. He never hid the deep feelings he held for this gentle nurse. Friends all noticed that Steve became more calm and steady with Lana by his side. He had found a peaceful harbor after years of journeying. Moving to North Carolina was initially just a change of environment, but in the end, it brought him an entirely new future. 6 years since the day he danced with his sister at her wedding, dreaming of a perfect partner, Steve was now preparing to marry the greatest love of his life. It was a beautiful day in the month of November in the year 2013. Many relatives and friends from far away had traveled to North Carolina to join in their celebration. The wedding of Lana and Steve was held right at their home in Charlotte. There was no fanfare and no showing off. It was a warm, sophisticated, and deeply emotional gathering. Love was present in every glance and every smile of the bride and groom. They were radiant, happy, and as connected as if they belonged to each other for many lifetimes. Immediately after the wedding, the couple decided to move to a new location, a dream home to share for the rest of their lives. This time, they chose a beautiful property located right on the border of South Carolina, on the banks of the poetic Lake Wylie. The house was painted in a cool, ocean blue, sitting gracefully on a large plot of land facing the flat, calm surface of the lake. It was as beautiful as a painting stepped out of a classic postcard. The couple enthusiastically renovated and decorated their new home. Steve was a person who truly valued spiritual treasures, and he spent time carefully arranging his collection of artwork and antiques in every small corner of the house. Every object to him had a separate story and a separate soul, and he was immensely proud of them. Living by the lake allowed them to indulge their passion for nature. Whenever there were fun outdoor activities, swimming or boating, Steve was always the first person to enthusiastically participate. The move to South Carolina also allowed them to be closer to the extended family. Nick, a nephew who had joined the family in the year 2010, loved to visit Uncle Steve and Aunt Lana. They frequently shared dinners, went to concerts, and gathered together during every holiday. Even more special, the house by the lake was only a 30-minute drive from the home of the son of Lana and her grandchildren. The couple always opened their arms to welcome the little angels to play. Steve had a special way with children. Deep inside, that sturdy man was a carefree, youthful soul. He did not hesitate to crawl on the floor to play with the children. When the children were around, the home of the Clayton family never lacked for laughter. In a video recorded by themselves, Lana giggled while filming Steve attempting to explain the rules of the limbo game to two of her granddaughters. "All right, there's a stick right here," Steve said, bending over and making silly motions to attract the attention of the two little girls. "And I have to go down like this. I have to get down very low to go under the stick. This is a game, a dance." While Lana was laughing heartily at the adorable clumsiness of her husband, the two little twins seemed more interested in the ice cream cones in their hands than the dance of their grandfather. Steve loved playing all kinds of games, from word puzzles that required deep thought to the silliest children's games. He was like a giant teddy bear, warm and patient, letting the children climb all over him. Their life passed peacefully and happily for 5 years. Everything seemed entirely perfect. However, when a machine runs at full capacity for a long time, it eventually needs maintenance. The excessive enthusiasm of Steve for physical activity eventually sent him a warning sign. In the month of June in the year 2018, while diligently renovating the large garden behind their house under the scorching sun, Steve suddenly felt dizzy. The scene before his eyes wobbled. He walked into the house, drenched in sweat, his face pale. He complained to Lana that his ears were ringing, his head was spinning, and a feeling of nausea rose up intensely. With the intuition and experience of a long-term nurse, Lana immediately recognized the condition of her husband. Previously, Steve had occasionally experienced mild dizziness due to vestibular syndrome, but this time it seemed more serious because he had exerted himself too much under the sun. "Are you okay?" Lana asked with concern, supporting him and taking a cold towel to wipe the sweat from the forehead of her husband. "I think perhaps I have sunstroke," Steve panted, leaning fully against his wife. Lana did not hesitate and immediately led him to the bedroom. She knew that for a person who was always moving like Steve, the best medicine, and also the most difficult to take, was absolute rest. She prepared a large glass of electrolyte water for him, made him drink it all, and then insisted he lie down on the bed, closing the curtains so the bedroom was submerged in gentle darkness. Steve closed his eyes. The fatigue accumulated from long days of working without stopping, from the parties, from taking care of the large garden, suddenly surged, drowning him in a deep sleep. He slept soundly. Lana kept watch by his side, frequently checking his blood pressure and ensuring the temperature of the room remained at an ideal level. When Rosie called to check on them, she was very worried when she heard the news that her brother was ill. "Do you think something is wrong with him?" Rosie asked over the phone. "It is very strange to see Brother Steve lying still for such a long time." Lana gently replied, "Do not worry too much, Rosie. He only has exhaustion and a recurrence of his vestibular syndrome from working in the sun for too long. I am watching him closely. He needs to sleep so his body can recover on its own." Rosie sighed with relief. She felt very reassured knowing that Lana was there. Who could take better care of Steve than a wife who loved him with all her heart and also possessed expertise in the medical field. Everything happened as Lana had predicted. The sleep lasted for 36 hours, along with the hydration and the dedicated care she provided, which had a positive effect. Steve woke up, though still a bit sluggish. His spirit had returned to clarity. He looked at his wife, who was nodding off by the edge of the bed, a deep sense of gratitude rising in his heart. This health incident, although just a common sunstroke and exhaustion, was a wake-up call for the entire Clayton family. Used to seeing a sturdy, invincible Steve, they had forgotten that he was also just a man over 60 years old, who needed rest and a more scientific lifestyle. But the story did not stop there. The experience of extreme worry from seeing her husband collapse caused Lana to make a decision. She had to change the daily habits of the family completely. With the determination of a medical professional, Lana began a health revolution right in her own home. Starting from that week, all kinds of snacks, carbonated soft drinks, and canned foods in the refrigerator were cleared out by Lana. In their place were green vegetables, fresh tubers and fruits, various types of nuts, and green smoothie recipes that looked quite strange. The highlight of this revolution was a type of detox herbal tea that Lana brewed herself according to a recipe she had learned from an Oriental medicine doctor. That liquid had a dark, blackish-green color, was thick, and had a terrible bitter taste. "My love, what is this?" Steve frowned, looking at the glass on the dining table on Monday morning. "It is a body-cleansing tea. It is very good for the digestive system and helps you rebalance your vestibular state." Lana smiled, her tone sweet but her eyes shining with an undeniable determination. "Drink it all." Steve, the man who had once commanded an entire corporation, now obediently closed his eyes and held his breath to gulp down the bitter glass of water under the watchful gaze of his wife. He shuddered and coughed. "Goodness, Lana, this smells exactly like weeds blended with dirt." Lana only laughed, handing him a small glass of plain water. "Bitter medicine is good for the body. You promised that you would listen to me, after all." Everything would have been just a fun memory of the couple, if not for the unexpected arrival of their nephew Nick and his sister Rosie over that weekend. They decided to drive to visit Steve after hearing he had been ill, bringing along several boxes of homemade baked cookies that Steve loved. When Nick and Rosie walked into the house, they expected to see a happy, healthy Steve running out to greet them as usual. But instead, they saw Steve lie on the sofa, wearing baggy pajamas, his face slightly pained, with a strange black liquid steaming next to him. "Good heavens, Steve, what happened to you?" Rosie exclaimed, rushing to the side of the sofa. Steve whispered, intentionally overacting to tease his sister, "I am being tormented, Rosie. Lana is making me drink some kind of poison. It is so bitter that I cannot feel my tongue anymore." At this moment, Lana walked out of the kitchen, carrying another large jug of that blackish-green water. She smiled brightly to greet everyone. "Oh!" Everyone came at the right time. "Nick, Rosie, do you want to try a little bit of intensive detox tea? It is very good for the liver." Nick stared at the jug of water, then looked at the large uncle who was grimacing on the sofa. He was a person who often worried, plus the fact that he had been sleep-deprived lately. His imagination suddenly took flight in a humorous way. Nick pulled Rosie into a corner and whispered, "Annie, do you see that Uncle Steve looks terrible? Is Aunt Lana forcing him to drink that stuff? Is it possible? Is she poisoning him with weeds?" Rosie laughed at the vivid imagination of her nephew. "Are you crazy? Lana is a nurse. She is taking care of his health." But to satisfy her curiosity and also to tease Lana, Rosie decided to play along with Nick, creating a small investigation right in the living room. She took the role of a serious detective, pulling out a small notebook from her handbag. "All right, Miss Lana Walsh." Rosie cleared her throat, trying to suppress a smile. "We have received an allegation that you are abusing your authority as a nurse to force a patient to drink liquids of unknown origin. Do you have any explanation?" Lana was startled for a second, then immediately caught on to the family joke. She set the jug of water on the table, put her hands on her hips, and pretended to be sharp. Dear Detective Rosie, I completely deny this allegation. My patient here, who is lying and groaning on the couch, has a history of eating too much barbecue and staying up late to watch sports. The liquid you call unknown origin is a combination of kale, celery, ginger, and a rare herb. I am saving his life. Steve groaned from the sofa. She is lying. She secretly puts that tea into my coffee, too. My morning coffee now tastes like the smell of soil after a downpour. The whole living room erupted in hearty laughter. Nick hit his forehead, sighing with relief, and admitted he had watched too many detective TV shows. He walked up and lifted a glass of Steve, took a small sip, and immediately grimaced, coughing. "Oh my, you are right, Uncle Steve. This is even worse than a punishment. Aunt Lana, I surrender." That afternoon passed in an incredibly warm atmosphere, filled with laughter. They cleaned the house together, helped Lana prepare a healthy dinner with salad and grilled salmon. Although Steve still grumbled about missing the greasy foods from before, deep in his heart, he knew that everything Lana did came from boundless love. A few weeks later, thanks to a light diet, those detox teas which were bitter but effective, and moderate physical activity, Steve had fully recovered. Not only that, he felt his body was lighter, his spirit refreshed, and he was much more flexible than before he was ill. He lost a few pounds of excess fat. His blood pressure was completely stable, and most importantly, the dizzy spells no longer bothered him. On Independence Day in July of that year, the Clayton family organized a large outdoor party by the lake. This time, instead of large barrels of beer and giant slabs of grilled meat, the table was filled with nutritious food, fresh fruit juice, and a little light wine. Everyone was surprised by the youthful and healthy appearance of Steve. Country music played vibrantly. Steve stepped forward, gently taking the hand of Lana and pulling her out to the middle of the lush green grass. "Please pay attention, everyone." Steve cleared his throat, raising a glass of apple juice. "Today, I want to send a special thank you to the most wonderful woman in my life. Thanks to those strange green drinks, those strict rules, and her love, I have realized that health is the most precious asset. Thank you, my Lana Sue, for enduring such a stubborn man as I am." He bent down to kiss her forehead gently amidst the applause and cheers of family and friends. Nick stood filming with his phone and laughed loudly. "I will send this video to the juice manufacturer. Uncle, you will be their representative model." This small event not only bonded the Clayton family more tightly, but also inspired them to move toward a more positive lifestyle. Realizing the great value of proactive health care, Steve and Lana decided to set aside a portion of their assets from the previous sale of the company to establish a scholarship fund. This fund specializes in providing scholarships for poor students overcoming difficulties to study nursing and physical therapy. They wanted to spread the spirit of dedication and kindness that Lana had shown, helping those with the desire to bring health to the community. A few